Hello and welcome to the last video in our database project. What we're going to do today is add to the database class so that it's able to execute the queries and the updates. So let's go to our project, and in our database, the first thing we're going to do is add a connector to the constructor. And so here we're going to pass a con, and we'll have a static connector here. And our connector is going to be equal to the one we pass in. And before we add our buttons to the JPanel, we'll add some action listeners. So here in this function, we'll call execute. And we'll create that method right now. And then we need to also add a reset action listener. And so in the reset action listener, we want to take a model from the table. So we need to add that also. That's a default table model. And so our reset function is just going to empty out the table. And to do that, we just need to set the columns and rows to 0. So set column count equals 0 and row count equals 0. And now that we have our action listeners, we'll add the execute method. Make that private. And so the first thing we're doing here is reset the table. And then when you get the SQL statement, that's sql.getText. Then here we need a try and a catch with a SQL exception. And so here we're going to get a result set. And that is exactly what it sounds like. It's a result set that returns after the query. So result set rs is equal to dc dot execute query. And we need to create that function execute query. And that's going to be in the connector. So it's just going to be public. It's going to return a result set. We'll call that execute query. I'm going to pass that a string. And that is going to return stat.execute query. Okay, and we'll create another function called execute update. And that is going to run stat.execute update. And now let's go back to our database class. So after I have our result set, we need to upload that into the JTable. And to do that, first we need to create the columns. To do that, we need a result set metadata. That's going to equal to rs.getMetadata. And so this metadata will allow us to get the number of columns. And with that, we can create a for loop. So int I is equal to 1. And we'll correct this, rsmd. So rsmd dot get column count. So I is less than or equal to rsmd dot get column count I plus plus. And so in the for loop, we're going to add columns to model. So model dot add column. It's going to be rsmd dot get column name at I. And so now that we have the columns, we're going to get the data. So while rs.next, we're going to create a string array. So string data. And that's going to be the size of the columns. Then we're going to take this same for loop. And so here we're going to take the element at I minus 1 in data and set that equal to rs.getString at I. Then now we can add a row. So model.addRow. And we're going to pass it the string array. Here we can add a system.out to print the error. Okay, and so let's test this, see if it works. So I'm connecting to a localhost. This port number, I'm going to use the database RPG. The username I'm going to use is root, and I have my password. So select star from item. Okay, and so our table is filled out. Now if we type in an error, we get you have an error in your SQL syntax. So let's try that query again. Okay, let's test the reset button. And so the reset button erases the table. We also want to add functionality for updates. So here we're going to add an if statement. So if s.length is greater than or equal to 6, and s.substring from 0 to 6 is equal to select. So let's go over that again. If s.length is greater than or equal to 6, we're going to check to see if the first 6 characters are equal to select. If it is, we're going to run a query. And we're going to have an else here. We're going to execute an update. Of course, if there's an error in the syntax, it's going to get printed here in the console. Okay, and let's add ignore case here. Let's test this out. We're going to use the same query from earlier. We're going to try to update one of these. So update item set type is equal to staff, where item ID is equal to 3330. Execute. We're going to call this query again and see if it updated. And so now this says staff. So we were able to update and call queries. And that completes our project. I hope you had fun creating this, and I hope to see you in future videos.